Tim Joyce, we're back. We're back.
Hey, how are you, man? We've
And
reconnected.
we're both I know our fans and followers have been missing us. We missed last week. We missed a couple of weeks, during Vive and all that craziness. But we made
Right,
it. I know you had a big day, your first official, public earnings report. So hence I see you're dressed up. And
right.
I'm in Siberia, but as I think Garber called it, I'm in Chicago for those,
In
Siberia
Chicago.
cold. Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So awesome. My first one today and still recording. So, which is good.
Exactly. Yeah, no, HealthBeacon issued. So yeah, we issued our full year 2021 results. This is a whole difference between a private company and a public company now. So we had to get on calls with analysts and do all that earnings and announcements, and it's all good receptivity. Stock price is
Awesome.
moving a bit.
Okay.
HBCN is for the viewers is the stock price.
Awesome.
So
It's
Chicago, you're at an investor conference, aren't you?
Yes, it's Met City News Invest Conference. I was moderating this morning a panel on mental health, where I actually got to meet Naomi from Bright Health. They just raised about $100 million.
Wow.
Amazing what they're doing. Interestingly enough, here at the conference, and kudos, thank you for inviting me. Arundhati is the editor-in-chief, so I enjoy the people and the content. I think it's interesting that some of the smaller ones you can just get to really get to know people. But one quick note, just like Euronext, it was getting aggressive in Europe. There was
Right.
the Toronto Stock Exchange here presenting on how for a private company to become on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So just
Yeah.
So
They've always been aggressive. Toronto's always
yeah.
been super, a lot of people go up there to list, and it's an interesting market. So excellent.
Yeah, I was never following that. So anyway, let's let our awesome guest in. So
Right.
Sandeep, who I've known now for, gosh, he won't let me lie, probably a decade or so, right, Sandeep? Roughly decade,
Hey.
probably longer even, I would say.
I think that's about right. When you were a mentor for us at Blueprint Health.
Blueprint Health, yeah. And I just, for the first time in literally like a decade, I just finally saw Brad Weinberg at
Brad,
Vive.
Vive. Me too.
I didn't even kind of recognize him. And Matt Farkash, I don't know, I haven't seen him in a while. But anyway, first of all, before we let you introduce, I don't know if you know Jim, Sandeep, Jim.
Yeah, Jim, we met informally with Marty, I think at Health 2.0 or at HIMSS way back when. And then I think we finally connected on LinkedIn through Eugene and, with Clubhouse and all that craziness that happened in 2020.
Yeah. No, I've seen your, avatar. And I remember that time we met, through all roads lead back to Marty's. So absolutely fantastic to be with you. I love your frame on your photo. It's
accidental. It's accidental. So this has all happened, during COVID. I had a camera laying around, so I didn't have anything to use. So it just kind of crops it that way. So people just assume it's like a frame to cover up my background.
It's fantastic. I like it. First one for us.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, delighted to have you on the Shot at Digital Health.
Yeah, I feel like I finally made it in my entrepreneurship, endeavors. Now that I'm talking to you both.
Right. It's a low bar.
And it's meticulously unproduced. So however your frame looks, we don't really care as long as we can see and hear you. But so for the millions of viewers, listeners, as we always kick it off, we want to get to know you. I kind of look at you as this, trailblazer clinician that adopted Health 2.0, digital health, as one of the early adopters, right? So maybe take us through kind of your journey, and then we'll interrupt all the time. So
sure, yeah, and I actually shared this with Mike Basili on his podcast I think like last year, just during COVID times, and people always ask me, colleagues that I trained with, how do you do what you're doing now? Because I want to do this now, or and it's just totally unconventional, unpredictable. I wasn't planning on doing this at all when I started pre-med, med school, all the stuff you normally do.
Right.
But yeah, long story short, it was due to a family illness, became a caregiver by accident, and basically got off that train of that training that you get on from undergrad, med school, and then residency. My wife was already in her residence at the time, so basically having to take care of a mom, mother-in-law, brother-in-law. Two of them were diagnosed with cancer. My mom had elevated ESR levels, which they could never tell for what reason it was, but it led to high-dose steroids as her therapy, and then which led to avascular necrosis, and then bilateral hip replacements, in her 50s. So all of this happened in a period of about 2 years, right? And then during that time, we had our daughter. I convinced my wife we would never go see a movie. So, typical guy stuff. I built a home theater in our basement just as a hobby. And people would come over and say, "Oh, who did this for you?" I'm like, "Oh, I just did it myself." And before I knew it, I was helping some friends and family put systems together. And then, long story short, I ended up meeting a builder here in Maryland who was doing about 8 to 10 of these basement remodels a month, and a lot of his customers were asking about how to do entertainment rooms, and so I was just designing these things and helping him, basically giving him the equipment to put in, and before long I started making more money doing that than finishing up my residency. So took a break, convinced my wife my scores were good, for 7 years, and if I mess this up I can go back and finish my residency and get a job as a doctor. So that never happened. So I did that, and then we ended up actually building a commercial network of ad-based TVs on top of gas pumps. Early on, partnered with a company called Pump Media, and so that's how I found out what it was to build a company. I didn't even know what entrepreneurship was when this happened, Eugene. So it was just you're on this, you have blinders on and focused on your career path, and if that family situation didn't arise, I would have been doing what all my other friends do now, which is working at a health system or in practice. Right. And but fortunately, during that event in med school, I did get a flavor of what you could do with your medical training outside of clinical medicine. So everybody takes their board review exams, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3, and there's the one board review everyone still uses, step 1 for the boards. One of my classmates made an MP3 of himself talking through the book so he could listen to it while he was working out, and started to sell copies of this to other students, and then he thought he was going to get in trouble for copyright violation. So he sent the CD off to
we should get him on Dan Kendall's, that he's like, sounds like this guy was an early podcaster without knowing that he was a podcaster.
Exactly, right? So he sent this CD off to the publishers thinking, hey, is it okay? And 2 weeks later, he gets a job offer because the guys that started that book sold the rights to a publishing company. Were building an e-learning platform, and for looking for med students that knew how to do this stuff, right? Like, who knew back then that you could make MP3s and all that stuff, right? So he was in Santa Monica for 2 weeks. Then he called me and said, hey, we need help. And that was amazing, right? For 6 weeks, they hired cheap medical students as cheap labor to validate the content. And so we were using a platform called Digital Lava that took PowerPoint slides with text and audio, so you could listen, hear, and read along with the content to help you learn faster. And the idea was medschool.com was a place you can go and take independent learning classes rather than pay for a 6-week-long or 2-week-long course, which costs thousands of dollars. So that we spent that little 6 weeks paid off, because what happened was when the recession happened, we ended up shutting down that media company. And Steve Smith, who started Medscape along with Peter Frishauf, hired me at MD Links. So that's where I got back into healthcare. And he told me later it was because I had that 4-week time or 6-week time building the e-learning platform that distinguished me from other doctors that he talked to. So that's how I got back into healthcare, and then was at MD Links, and then met Mathew and Indu at a Health 2.0 event in DC at Kaiser Permanente, where I think it was the first year of Datapalooza, where Todd Park and the team, Aman Bandari was actually a judge at the Datapalooza event that we were part of the Health 2.0, and the challenge was use open government data to build something to solve obesity. So I had some idea based on research that I was seeing coming across the work we were doing at MD Links, and took some pieces of elements of BJ Fogg's behavior theories on using short changes to drive larger changes, and looking at outcomes from smoking cessation programs and diabetes prevention programs and Voxiva, Text for Baby, all this stuff was happening like early 2009, 2007. And so showed up, had an idea, didn't even know what a hackathon was, and wrote my idea on a board. 2 hours later, 4 people came up and said, let's build it. And then when we pitched it the next day, we won 3rd place and $1,000. So basically the idea we came up with was, build daily healthcare challenges that come from your doctor to the patient as a text message. So when you leave your doctor's office, right, rather than them telling you, hey, go home, eat better, and exercise, see you in 6 months, now you have some guidance, and that guidance is in the form of a daily challenge that keeps you motivated and helps you achieve those goals. So for example, we looked at open government data sets there's actually a nutrition database, a farmers market database. There was amazing sources of information like weather data. So we combined all of that into targeted challenges. So for example, if I was your doctor, Jim, I would say, hey, Jim, I challenge you to eat something purple today. Hopefully you had an eggplant at home, you'd cook it, say, okay, if you didn't, or you didn't respond positively, our next challenge would be, I challenge you to add eggplant to your shopping list, right? So that's how we kind of built these behavior models.
Wow.
And so everyone said, hey, you guys should actually build this thing. It actually, could work. So, as a hackathon, everybody goes away, right, back to their day jobs. But because we won the 3rd place, we got to go to the Datapalooza conference. And I went to the session on the pioneering ACOs who were presenting their outcome data. This is, remember, the first 9 health systems that were doing the CMI innovation models. And so the moderator was Atul Gawande. So the room was packed. And I happened to sit next to this gentleman who was starting his own ACO in San Antonio. And he basically said, we started chit-chatting before the start of the session, asked me what I was doing, told him about the hackathon, and I showed him what we built. And he looks at me and goes, can I buy this from you? I'm like, what, are you serious? He goes, yeah, we have a lot of Hispanic patients that are diabetic patients in our patient population. And, we'd love to engage with them using the texting protocols. And I was like, you're kidding me. So in literally 3 days, we took an idea, built an MVP, and found a customer.
That's unbelievable.
What was it called? Because I think around the same time, there was this company, Earned It, I think it was, like the early days. Yeah, I forget the guy's name.
This was completely, just built on behavior, right? The idea was just to see how we can drive engagement with patients and their doctors, Eugene. It wasn't built on a kind of like a like a payment model, or, that could have possibly been something that it evolved to. But, I ran into Aman later on at that conference, said, hey, how do you help these hackathon ideas that come out that could be viable? He said, well, we haven't figured that part out yet, right? Health 2.0 at the time was just focused on bringing all of these different people together who weren't normally in the same room to help, come up with these ideas. And luckily, he had put me in touch with Matt and Brad. So that's how I met the Blueprint guys, Eugene. So
got it.
Then you built.
So that's where I started getting to know you.
Yeah. So what happened was, when I shared what happened with Matt and Brad, they loved the idea, the fact that we had a potential customer, it was validated, everything the Blueprint looks for in their company, except I had just missed their cutoff for their second cohort of companies that was starting in the summer of 2012. And so they gave me 2 choices. I could either reapply for January 2013, which is their winter cohort, with this idea and what we worked on at the hackathon, or if I promised not to work on my idea, but they asked if I could come and mentor those companies that were in their class for 6 weeks, because none of them had a medical person on their team. So I took all my vacation time at MD Links, went to New York, and then never went back. That's basically what happened. Wow. And so, at the end of my 6 weeks, 4 of the companies there asked me to come on board as their co-founder, and I joined the team at HRS, Health Recovery Solutions, where we started one of the first CHF readmission platforms. Signed Hackensack University as our first client after Blueprint.
You know, it's interesting, and I think this was also something to Brad, and as one of the earlier accelerators, I think one of the first.
Second, it was just second. Rock Health and those guys. Yeah,
that's right. I think just the foresight of having, because there's so many companies that were spun up around that time by a bunch of techies, right? And not all, but that clinical aspect and rigor to getting this moving. As we talk about kind of evidence in digital health. So I think that was good foresight, and you took the leap, right?
No, absolutely. And if I hadn't gone to that hackathon, and it was funny, Steve Jobs always says there's difference between dreamers and doers, right? It's like one of the questions that people always ask me today. So my question back to them is, how much risk are you able to take? Like, what's your risk tolerance? Are you willing to give up your 6-figure salary and jump in and not make money for 20 months, right? Or whatever, how long it takes. So yeah, it wasn't, but it was great to have that support network. And, being connected into that, that shared experience with other entrepreneurs that were, in that with you, right? So, having somebody that can understand what you're going through, talk to them, bounce ideas off. It's unique when you're starting something from scratch and having that ecosystem around you. And yeah, it was a great experience. And, it was amazing 6 weeks being around some super passionate, smart folks, working on some important problems. And it was I feel kind of grateful that happened.
And Sandeep, how do you so just listening to you kind of walk through, probably I feel like it was 20 years of experience there it just ran through. But how do you, when you look at the risk, it seems like you're quite prone, you're quite comfortable, like, hey, if God throws you a path, you kind of run with it. Is that how you look at it? Or
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't, if anybody had asked me if I was an undergrad or high school, it was not something until you're faced with it, Jim. I guess the best answer, no one plans to do that, right? But some people are motivated by their own independent challenges, or something that they know they have to fix, right? I mean, that's the common thing I've seen in a lot of folks that have started these companies that we were with, and through Blueprint got to meet some extraordinary people. And speaking of Blueprint, Eugene, there are eye for companies and value that they're creating. It's amazing. I think something like 80% of Blueprint companies are still around today after 10 years. So it's pretty amazing what those guys did in the early days of finding the right kind of problems to work on. Yeah.
Wow.
And a lot of them have been acquired too. I'm sure you've seen a lot of the releases of the events that Blueprint companies have gone through. I think Jean.
I remember
Touch surgery was. Touch
right.
surgery in the UK. John, those guys were Blueprint. Right. I think in the third class.
Right. And so then how do we get to Bioformis?
No, it's been fun, right? So I spent the last 10 years. So, having worked, remember, I didn't go to New York to start a company. It was just a mentor. So my wife was literally, after 3 years going back and forth to New York, you got to pick your company, your family, because we had, our other daughter at the time. And so after we signed Hackensack, we were in a good place. So I, basically told the guys, look, I'm sorry, but I got to go back to Maryland. And so that's what happened. So I live in Maryland. Everyone thinks I'm in New York because I spent so much time there. But yeah, fortunately, one of the people that I got to meet while I was at Blueprint was Bob Stern. So Bob had just sold MedPage Today to Everyday Health and was looking to kind of build on that experience they had starting that. And so MedPage, what they did was create the opportunity for doctors to earn CME credit by reading consumer information that you would get from the New York Times, CNN. So when patients walked into your doctor's office, you weren't surprised by an article that the patient referenced, say, hey doc, I want to get on this drug, or be on this therapy they saw in the news. A lot of times doctors were behind keeping up the journal articles. So it was MedPage served that purpose, so you could get that same content but get CME credit by reading it on MedPage. So that idea of using CME was a great way to get engagement. And so one of the things that we learned at HRS was, how can we, one of the things we kept getting asked by medical directors was, it's great that we're solving this readmission problem, but we have a bigger issue, which is how do we make sure that doctors and nurses and our clinical teams are doing the right things up front to prevent this from happening. So which was kind of like the education component. So when Rob reached out to me after I stepped out of HRS, and he asked me about what they're doing. I said, look, I don't know anything about CME, but this is where I think there's a really interesting opportunity. So remember, this was still in the early days of quality metrics, doctors, value in terms of their total quality measures were essentially put on a big TV screen in the doctor's lounge. So you can see a number, right, or how good or bad you were, but there was no way to get you better. There was nothing to, so it was a very similar kind of idea, right? So I said, Bob, what do you think about this? What if we looked at those quality measures and then are able to provide CME content to help you improve? And essentially modeled after, back in 2009, the Institute of Medicine wrote this report on a learning healthcare system, which was how do you leverage digital data, EMR information to build this continuous loop on, learning from individual doctor performance or clinical team performance and close those knowledge gap and improve outcomes for patients, right? So this kind of big model. And I think we had kind of key components to address that. So in order to scale that, fortunately, this was around the same time. So yeah, so I ended up jumping on the team with Bob, and at the time, they just got accepted into Startup Health. So I went from Blueprint to Startup Health. So it kind of followed that ecosystem, right? So I kind of look at it as going from high school to college to grad school in terms of the scale and size of the companies that Startup Health invested in. They were a little bit more mature, and so it was funny, so having seen the different models, right? We had the 12-week intense kind of mentorship at Blueprint. And Startup Health was more kind of like a long-term horizon to give you, quarterly check-ins, how do you scale and build companies? So it was a different scale and size of where you were in the stage of your companies.
Right.
So it was really interesting to get both perspectives going from Blueprint to Startup Health. But the team there was great. Unity and Steven built a great kind of platform to help find and scale this company. So I think we were in the third or fourth class at Startup Health when Bob joined at Point of Care.
Right.
So we were set out to use CME content as a way of driving outcomes. And so that was around the same time that IBM Watson opened up their AI platform for outside partners. And so we applied, we had a great use case, and we met some of the key criteria that the IBM team was looking for, which is, do we have a use case? Do we have a value proposition? And how quickly can we build a trained AI model? And because we had our CME content that Bob's legacy company had, we were able to combine all of those and went through their validation program and actually launched a product that combined the Watson AI tool with our CME content. So within 30 seconds now, doctors can ask on our app a clinical question and get an answer that's evidence-based. And more importantly, gives them the chance to earn CME credits over the course of their 24 months. You can accumulate a significant amount of CME. And so that's what led us to launch that company and work with pharma companies to power the medical education of that.
Okay. And so then just a quick, so then then you joined Bioformis?
Yep. So I'm getting there. So the reason I'm mentioning those two things is, right, so it was the clinical readmission work plus the AI. And then the last couple of years spent work time building virtual care models. So the opportunity at Bioformis, so, I had kind of heard of Bioformis in the periphery for the last couple of years, and I always thought of them more on the pharma side of the world, in which they were, right? They started about 6 years ago.
By the way, Sandeep,
yep.
Sorry to interrupt. I should have just grabbed Jaydev. He's here at the conference.
What, are you serious? Where are you?
So I'm in Chicago, Med City.
Oh, at the Invest. Yeah.
Yes,
Jaydev's at the Invest conference. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So that's right. So yeah.
So if you have his number, tell him to come to the bar and he'll say hello. I don't have his number. So.
Yeah, right. I don't know what his schedule is. Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, that's exactly right. So Kuldeep and Jaydev and Maulik started Bioformis, helping to build digital biomarkers and work with pharma companies. And then about 14 months ago, started to validate that those biomarkers, so the algorithms, the general algorithm underlying the work that the team was building, started to identify deterioration in patients outside of the core disease areas that they're looking for, and then went through the FDA validation as a software as a device. And so that analytics engine now, which we call our BioVitals Index, is able to identify patient deterioration in a disease agnostic way. And that's important because we use continuous BioVitals data sources. So either a patch or a wearable that is sharing key BioVitals biometric information. And it became apparent that index could be utilized for complex patients for shifting care out of the hospital. So this kind of aligned with COVID, where there was work already being done with that model at Brigham and Women's of using the biometric platform, the BioVitals Index. And so in partnership with Brigham and Women's, they created kind of like the hospital home acute care program that allows now you to shift complex care from the hospital setting into the home setting, using the index as an early warning system, if you will, so you can scale this without the resources required to manage complex patients, right? So we'd help to deliver these programs using our platform. And so that's what led me to Bioformis, is that it kind of encompasses everything I've been working on for the last 10 years in one spot, that combines that clinical aspect plus the AI tools. And now, how do you scale that virtual care delivery, to patients in the home?
So quick fact here. So Bioformis, right? So Bioformis is Singapore. It was Singapore originally, right? Yep. And then they relocated to Boston.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So then, so we share like early days, the SGI, the Singaporean, like the government of Singapore, made an investment in Bioformis and HealthBeacon, my company.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know that.
So early on,
I didn't know either. I learned something new about you finally, Jim Joyce.
We're the only company that got both the Irish government and the Singaporean government to invest at the same time in a project. But we got to know the Singapore. Have you spent time in Singapore?
No, not yet. I've only been here honestly for 4 months. So it feels like I've been here for a long, but it's been amazing, right? To see all the tools we have. And, I'm actually focused right now on helping grow our opportunities in the care delivery side. So there's two verticals. We have the therapeutic side of the business, and then we have the care side of the business. So I'm, on the care side right now, but it's been interesting. There's some, obviously with where things are heading, I'm sure there's going to be some overlap between how, therapeutics and pharma starts to play a role in the care side as well. So it'll be interesting what happens in the next couple of years. And it's actually been fascinating to hear now how the tools are actually being used and the care models are actually being utilized to drive better outcomes. I don't know if you guys saw yesterday, but we have a partnership with Discovery Health in South Africa. The CEO of Discovery Health actually shared a really compelling patient story, and it's great to hear because a lot of the Bioformus team, it's international, and a lot of them don't get to see the end product, right? Because there's engineers and project managers, and it's always great to see how what you're working on is impacting patients. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So it was great for them to share that story.
Before we dive deeper into Bioformus, and I think I'd love to understand kind of where the whole Bioformus as a DTX company initially. I know you guys haven't kind of used it, but before we go into that, I'd love for you to contrast, I would say, the early days, and aside from the size of the funding rounds, what do you think has changed in digital health in this decade plus, as having a clinical background and a medical background?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that. I feel like, having been in this space now for 10 years, you've seen, and you start recognizing, I think we've been around long enough now, you see patterns, right? You start seeing things. There was a great podcast that Shiv did with Mark Cuban a couple of days ago about his, cost plus pharma company, pharmaceutical, the pharmacy. And, Mark's take was, it's simple business, right? You take care of people that are sick. The challenge is aligning on the business models, the incentives, like where do they align? So I think that's been the biggest kind of change, is that early on, it was like back when we started, it was easy to find some place to make an impact, right? Because there was so many things that you could start testing and trying. And as things started to evolve, it's now become more important that your solution is able to show value, right? It's no longer let's try something. There's enough information out there. So if I was starting a company today, you have to understand, what is the regulatory framework? What are the business models? What are the ways that this is sustainable? So, and those things, I think, while important in the early days, it was easier to get to that. Oh, you know what? I can do this one thing and I can show an improvement. Now you have to do that in a framework that people know how to evaluate, right? So back then, a lot of these tools didn't exist for, how do you take an idea and make sure that it's going to drive an ROI? Well, a lot of that work now, I think, has kind of been built on. So if you have an idea, you have to show value in terms of what are the outcomes, how is this going to impact your revenue, what is the ROI? So I think that's the biggest difference, Eugene, is that now, while the same problems may exist, it is, as a new company or as a new startup, you have to start addressing the value proposition a lot sooner than, early on, where you could try for a longer time.
And what's your take coming in after having worked in these, everything from a hackathon, over the weekend to a, obviously you had the beginning of your residency, but like, what's that like now coming into, Bioformus has raised a lot of money. It has, it has a lot of clients. It has a lot of progress. What's that like going into an organization like that? Does it feel like you're going into a big company? Does it feel like you're going into, a company that's just become big very quickly? How's it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I was nervous, right? Because, as there's a certain type, right, Jim? You just want to roll up your sleeve and just get everything done, right? You just move so fast. And as a startup, you can do that. And so that was my worry. And I talked to a lot of folks. They said, but fortunately, that's, the thing with here at Bioformus is that where we are in terms of the care side of the business, it still feels startup-y because there's so much happening. There's a lot of, ways of acting quickly, moving and learning and, iterating so that we're always kind of improving what we're doing. The good thing is that, we have resources, right? Where before it would have to be, split between a small group of folks. We now have a larger team that can work on these. Sorry, that's been the biggest insight for me is like, when you're at a bigger company, you can still move quickly and evolve, but you have the resources to make sure that you can do this in a way that's efficient. That's unlike you kind of you have to prioritize, right? You still have to prioritize here, but you have the luxury of having team members that you can rely on to help you figure these things out, rather than having to do it by yourself or one or two people.
You're just getting lazy, Sandeep. You're now relying on other people. That's what it is. 10 years just grinding.
Yeah. Right. I feel like I'm kind of cheating a little bit. Yeah.
So, it's interesting. I just lots of discussions, lots of investors here. And of course, DTX is a topic, both kind of the prescription side and non-prescription, and everything I'm hearing from the investors, the PDT side, everybody's kind of watching, Pear and Achille to a certain extent, when and how there will be traction. How do you guys look at, I'll say, the digital therapeutic side of the business, or do you no longer consider bioinformatics? Because you mentioned you have the care surrounding it, you have almost like remote patient monitoring. So how do you guys think about the space as DTX and tie that to bioinformatics?
Yeah, look, I can't speak too much about it, Eugene, just because I haven't worked on that side of the fence yet on bioinformatics. But from what I've seen talking to folks like Maulik and Jaydev, is that I don't think we're moving away from the pharma side. There's actually a lot of work that's still happening in that space. And, the platform that was created, the unique thing about that is that it was built from that rigor and, all the methodology that requires to go through that process of finding and building digital biomarkers, right? Unfortunately, that work was able to, in parallel, be used. So I think over the next, 5-6 years, we'll probably see that kind of be a feedback loop, right? The work that's being done on the pharma side is going to start informing more things that we can probably do on the care side, and vice versa. So as we start getting more deeper into kind of like our specialty disease management. So a couple of weeks ago, we announced the fact that what makes Bioinformatics unique is not just our technology platform, but we have wraparound services, right? So we have our own separate entity that's our, like our clinical partner. So we have clinical team members that can look at these data points and actually make clinical decisions on behalf of our healthcare partners. So we can use those team members to plug gaps, especially now with resource constraints, right? So the cardiometabolic diseases, diabetes, those are the kind of areas now we can take on that disease management profile using, so for example, heart failure is a good example, right? So besides the FDA cleared bioviolence index that we have for early deterioration alerts or signals, late last summer, we actually got de novo clearance for our heart failure management AI tool that actually helps to recommend at the right time based on multiple factors like labs, biometric data, the appropriate time to titrate and maybe switch the medication. So for heart failure, I think something like 10-12% of all heart failure patients are on the recommended dose of their heart failure medication. So that it's the GDMT, which is guideline directed medical therapy, is the optimal regimen that most heart failure patients should be on. But more patients are not on that because of the time required from the patient and the provider side to make sure that those appropriate inputs are followed and the recommended guidelines are initiated. So by automating that, it helps to scale access to those kind of tools. So that's really where I think we've seen opportunities on that specialty care. Everyone's kind of focused on primary first or digital, primary, like, Amazon Care, and these are virtual primary care services. We're focused more on the complex specialty side using our AI tools. And I think that's where you'll start seeing, that all of that work was informed based on the work that was done on the pharma side. So I think you'll start seeing more of those kind of opportunities overlap.
When you think about this space and you think about, like, when I look at Bioformus and, and it's done acquisitions, it's raised lots of capital, it's adding this care management structure, but even, beyond, obviously you're just in with your new employer for a month, so I won't ask you any controversial question, but what do you think the future looks like? Because it feels like when I watch these companies, like I have one of my contemporaries here in Ireland, Let's Get Checked, for example, that is a really interesting company, great leadership. They started off with a very clear kind of diagnostic angle at home testing, and then they've built out care teams outside of that. I just saw they just did an acquisition just over the last 2 days. What's your prediction so it feels like these companies come in with a unique angle. Like it felt like it was kind of AI, early detection, bioformis, some smart MITers, kind of figuring stuff out, kind of building up from there successfully. what's your prediction as to how these companies, do they keep kind of morphing, and what do you think the space looks like in 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so many, right? There's these digital first companies now around specific silos of specialty care for GI, women's health. And so I think what you're going to have to look at are platforms that can serve as the underlying data source, and then you're going to have to build specific kind of signals that will help you manage these. And the reason I'm saying that is that it becomes important from the other side of the fence, right, or the other side of the table, as a health system or providers of that care, either if it's a health plan or a hospital or a clinic. As more of these tools become kind of AI driven or automated, it's going to be that same problem, right? Look at what happened in the telehealth space. There's 1,500 telehealth companies, and hospital systems had to deal with 10 or 12 different telehealth vendors, like for every department, every use case. So I think that's a similar model to what's going to happen with this space in terms of care delivery, Jim. It's that I think you're going to have to start looking at consolidating these solutions from being point solutions into a unified platform that can help you manage patients more broadly, so they let you fine tune those signals and apply those AI tools across different patient populations, but from a standard data model.
Don't you feel like, I feel like, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I feel like it's going to, depending on what health system, how you enter in the health system, you could just end up with this entirely different experience in the future, because the model of what one company does, like the Teladoc Livongo model or wherever, so it's like, okay, we have a view, so we adopted this one, but these technologies probably under the hood, they feel the same on the top, but under the hood, they have to be so different.
Yeah. And I think that's to that point. I don't know if you saw, I think 2-3 days ago, the FDA actually put some language out around how to define a digital biomarker, right? How to define what that is. And I think it's great to start having that common definition, because like you said, people are, it's going to go what it means to you versus what it means to me. So having that language now be out there, I think it's a good first step by what Bakul and the team did at the FDA.
So, before I think we go, Jim, maybe we go to your famous question, but I think because of this history rewind of 10 years, this is going to be, in our post, we usually do the fun mentions. I think this one will be the longest one of them all. You were just shooting them out there, so anyway, but Jim, why don't you go to your famous last question for Sandeep?
Okay, Sandeep, picture yourself talking to a young, recently married resident that just came off a caregiving stint, kindly looking after family members, thinking about what he's going to do next in his career, goes out with some friends. He meets up with Eugene in New Jersey for a beer, he invites him along to a hackathon outside of Hackensack, and he walks in, and you come up with this young version of yourself comes up with this phenomenal technology or idea. What advice would you give to the young Dr. Sandeep Jr.?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think, it's find the right people, find the right team, find the right folks that are going to be able to help you accomplish this, right? Because that's the most important thing, is having the right set of experts around you, especially in the world that we're in, right? A lot of the challenges around starting companies, like HRS wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the regulatory framework that required penalties. So, having that, the right folks around you, I think that's the most important thing in this space, is to make sure that you're building something that's adding value, but that's going to be sustainable. So if you don't have the right team, it's not going to work.
I was tempted to, so thank you for that advice. I absolutely, and I think people are everything. And I was gonna go find your people, but I figured let's not take up more time of our viewers. So yeah. I'll just pass on to Jaydev. But great having you, Sandeep. Great kind of reconnecting. And to all the millions of viewers and listeners, hit subscribe and share it out.
Pleasure to spend some time with Sandeep. What a background. I'm gonna go back and listen to it again and think about it. It seems like you've tracked this phenomenal journey, and now you're with this really exciting company. So I wish you the absolute best with Bioformus.
Oh, thank you both. Yeah, it's been fun talking to you both. Sorry we didn't have our shot today, but next time.
I am at the bar. There's a bar right there. So, cheers, guys.
Cool. Thanks, guys.